So welcome to Effective Online Case Teaching. The Global Business School Network is a nonprofit organization. We're based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to strengthen management education. We build management education capacity to specifically help improve the pool of managers in the developing world. We do this in two different ways. We have member schools that we help facilitate networking, knowledge sharing, things like this webinar, and we also do international development capacity building programs where we utilize the expertise of our network members to go into developing world schools and help them with things like faculty development, capacity building, strategic planning, etc. These are our member schools. It's a long list and growing quickly. We're excited to have 53 member schools, I believe, at this point from 26 different countries. They're all leaders in their region and many in the world in management education, and they've all made a commitment to our mission to build management education capacity for the developing world. You can find out more about membership on our website, gbsnonline.org, or we'd be happy after the webinar to answer any questions that you have. So this webinar is part of Case Method Month, which is one of the initiatives that we have to encourage networking and knowledge sharing primarily. So you are participating in our first webinar of Case Method Month. There are two more. They are on asking better questions of your students, whether online or in the classroom, and also for top mistakes the case teachers make, again focused on classroom case teaching. And those will be coming up later in the month, and when we follow up with you, we will send you the dates for those webinars. We also have been having guest bloggers from around the globe talk about writing cases, teaching cases, etc. I encourage you to check out our blog and see what they've had to say. And we've also compiled lists of great articles, of websites, of places to find cases, student competitions, writing competitions, kind of a one-stop shop for all you need to know about writing and teaching cases on our website. So I encourage you to take a look at gbsnonline.org/case-method. Finally, I get to our presenters for today's webinar. We are thrilled to have David Foster and Atul Nerkar speaking to you today. They both hail from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Kenan-Flager's Business School, which is an executive board member school of GBSN, and we are proud to say that their dean is on our board of directors. I want to introduce them to you very briefly here. David Foster is the Vice President of Curriculum for MBA at UNC, which is at the cutting edge of online education. It is a new initiative that is teaching a full MBA course online. We're very excited to have him talking with us today about that. David himself has a particular interest in case-based learning, and he did his doctoral work at Northwestern University's Institute for Learning Sciences, where he developed interactive cases architecture that automatically coach students through the financial analysis process. He's also developed a unique problem-based learning approach in course design and has a significant career in the private sector as well. Also joining us today is Atul Nerkar, who is the Associate Dean of Executive MBA Programs at Kenan-Flager. He is a professor of strategy and entrepreneurship, and as well as being a dean, and his research and teaching interests are in the area of strategy with an emphasis on technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And he looks at a variety of sectors, including manufacturing, electronics, chemicals, biotechnology, and pharmaceuticals. So these are two leaders in this field. We're so excited to have them talking to us today, and so without further ado, I would like to pass the baton on to David Foster, who will talk to you about effective online teaching. David.
Great. Thank you, Paige. Can you hear me?
We can.
To start out, do you want to just go ahead and put up that poll?
Yes, I absolutely will. Hold on one moment. Thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, I have lost my, I apologize, I lost my GoToWebinar screen for a moment. Here we go. So we have a poll that is, there we go, I apologize. All right, so we have a quick poll just to gauge the experience level of the people who are here with us today. So if you would take a moment to participate and tell us what your personal experience with the case method is. Have you taught cases? Have you taught them in the classroom only? Have you taught them in an online setting? And it looks like we have an interesting mix. Great. I'll give you just another minute to vote. We have, almost everyone has voted so far. All right, great, 100%. Now I'm going to share the results with you. And it looks like we have about a quarter of you have actually taught cases in the online setting so far. 30% of full have not taught with cases at all. So those of you, I want to encourage you definitely to attend our other 2 case teaching webinars. And it looks like almost half have actually taught cases and are familiar with that, but are interested in an online setting. So David, I hope that is helpful to you as you move forward in your presentation.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it's nice to see a good mix of people, and I'm sure we'll get some good questions from those who have actually also already taught with cases online. So, all right, let me get started here. Okay. So to get started, let me tell you a bit about our online program and a little bit about my own perspective on this whole topic. The MBA at UNC is a relatively new MBA program that started its first cohort of students in July 2011. Like UNC's full-time MBA program, it's highly selective. In fact, the admissions criteria are just as high as the full-time program. And our mandate was that the educational quality in this online program needed to be as high or higher than the traditional program. Since universities typically don't have the resources or expertise to achieve this on their own, the Kenan-Flager Graduate Business School has partnered with Tutor, which has built and delivered online programs with a number of top universities. Tutor provides the technical learning platform as well as design, admissions, and student support. My own role in particular is curriculum and faculty support, which means that I work directly with full-time professors at the school on course development and supportive teaching. I bring a cognitive science perspective to this effort, and the case method, as Paige indicated, has been a special interest of mine over the years. As context, and begging your indulgence, let me mention 3 points of reference. First, in my doctoral work at a research lab called the Institute for the Learning Sciences, I developed a case-based learning architecture in the domain of financial statement analysis. It wasn't exactly like the traditional case method, rather it was a self-paced interactive learning environment that coached the student as they tried to analyze particular cases. The insight I got from that work was a better understanding of the cognitive load issues going on inside a student's head while they're trying to make sense of a complex real-world business scenario. And that the game is about getting them to notice certain bits in a case without just telling them to notice them. The second point of reference was in an online macroeconomics course I taught, in which I tried a version of the case method with an off-the-shelf Harvard case. Now this is before the advent of synchronous class meetings in higher ed. As I'm sure many of you know, most online education, even today, is still based on asynchronous discussion boards. And so my little experiment was to try to have effective case discussion asynchronously. To make a long story short, my insight from this is that it's extremely difficult to make it work effectively with a purely asynchronous interaction. A Harvard-type case is too open-ended for an asynchronous environment, and without the live class meeting to pull things together, even diligent students end up feeling a little lost. Third and last was when I was director of course development at a high-profile venture called UNext, which was an early attempt to create a high-quality online MBA program with 4 top universities. In the course model we implemented, courses basically consisted of realistic business scenarios. The students were thrown into them and asked to perform their analysis and write-up and submit deliverables. The theory was that we were trying to create effective business practitioners and that you can't accomplish that with textbook learning. So not everything about UNext was successful, but the insights that I got there were about how to force students to connect issues to their own background knowledge and how appropriate case scenarios can challenge their assumptions. So how I'd summarize, different approaches have their strengths and weaknesses, but I definitely am an ideologue when it comes to case-based learning, struggling with real-world cases and scenarios as opposed to studying theories and models. I think that's the way to make it stick, and that's how to connect it to each student's own unique understanding and knowledge. So enough about me and my perspective. Let me tell you more about the courses that we're doing in the MBA at UNC. First, the basic model. MBA at UNC courses consist of both asynchronous materials and required weekly synchronous class meetings. Our students are from all different locations in the U.S. and the world, and almost all of them are also working full-time. And as I said, they're required to attend weekly class meetings, but to be realistic, these meetings are usually 1.5 hours rather than the 3 hours per week that's more typical of daytime programs. So there's not a lot of time for lecturing. The aim, therefore, is to move whatever we can, or at least whatever makes sense, into the asynchronous realm so that students can study and get prepared on their own schedules, and so that each week's synchronous meeting is as efficient and productive as possible. Now, as an aside, this model does not mean that students are on their own the rest of the week. Our students have full access to the synchronous platform, which is integrated with our learning management system, so that they can have live meetings with their classmates for study sessions or group projects at whatever meeting times they need to. And of course, our professors have office hours in which students and faculty sit down together virtually. I also should just briefly acknowledge that these words are kind of a mouthful, and I hope it's clear to everyone what they mean. We use these terms all the time around here, and so I forget sometimes. You can think about it this way. Synchronous refers to the online class meeting, everyone in the same room at the same time. And asynchronous basically is everything else, the materials, the discussion boards, the emails, and so on. So there are a couple unique requirements of our synchronous class meetings that are worth highlighting. One is that webcams are mandatory for all students, and webcams must be on at all times. If you've used these systems yourself, you probably know the technology today is not perfect, and often troubleshooting is required to fix technical problems that arise. And so this requires us to have a dedicated team of online student support. The second requirement, or policy that we have, is that class size is capped at 15. So we will have multiple sections of a given course each term, but each section has its own professor and a maximum of 15 students in it. In the live class meeting, this produces a level of intimacy that has not really previously been a feature of online education. And as we like to say, every student has a front row seat. There's no analog to the hiding in the back row, which we know is common in classes that might have 50 or more students in them. So that's kind of the foundation of our course model. Now, as I said, we are a relatively new program, and like in most MBA programs, our students have been taking introductory courses in marketing, finance, accounting, economics, and so on. And we're kind of in the mainstream in that these introductory courses aren't dominated by cases, though the majority of them do have cases. But as we move into the second year of coursework, cases are playing a much more central role in many of our courses. So far, the ways that cases have been done in different courses have pretty much run the gamut. In some courses, cases are simply read by students and then discussed informally during class. Some case assignments require students to submit something before class, and some don't. Some require students to work together in small groups, and some don't. Here real quickly are just 3 specific examples. In our global marketing course, each student is responsible for one of the 5 cases in the course and briefly presents their analysis to the entire class, after which a more general discussion opens up. In the course Taxes and Business Strategy, the faculty makes a point of cold calling a student during the synchronous case discussion, and then cold calling a second student, and so on. And in our financial accounting course, it has an extended case that's reviewed over multiple weeks. It's the full financial statements of a Fortune 500 corporation. So it's probably useful to mention here that we've organized a team teaching approach in MBA at UNC. In some online programs, the approach is to have each faculty member put up their own course. In ours, a lead faculty member works with a professional team to develop the course, and then that basic course is used by the faculty members who teach the sections of that course. Those faculty all meet together weekly with the coordinating professor to discuss what happened in the past week, to plan and prepare for the upcoming synchronous sessions, and to discuss any other issues related to the course. And having meetings this frequently allows the faculty to share best practices with one another. And we also provide opportunities for sharing at the program level as well. For example, a faculty member in one course may present to the rest of the faculty their technique for facilitating a case discussion. So now let me kind of wrap things up before I turn it over to Atul, and hopefully in a way that doesn't steal any of his thunder. As I said, I kind of have my own vantage point on this whole topic. I think a lot about the student's perspective and the struggles a student needs to go through as they're trying to make sense of a complex business situation. And there's a real trade-off. You want the student to arrive at certain points, but you want them to arrive there via their own mental locomotion, so to speak. You want them to own it. That, I think, is the beautiful problem of the case method, and I'm sure Atul will talk a bit more about this. I think the limitations and the affordances of the technical platform environment has to be part of the strategy as well. And the news there gets a little better each year. Our learning management system provides a wealth of tools and structures for social interactions between students. I've mentioned the capability for synchronous online meetings, which can be set up by small groups at a moment's notice. Our LMS also has capabilities for conditional sequencing and gating. This means certain designated content is not released for student access until a condition is met. So, for example, until a synchronous meeting is over or until the student has submitted their answers to a question. And, you know, not least the webcams, being in an online room where you can all see each other. It's not identical to what it's like to be in the same physical room with them, but it sure is getting closer to that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Atul, who I have to point out has led case method discussions in graduate business education for years and years, while I have never done so. So Atul is the guru, and I'm just a poseur, and so I advise you to listen to him more than you do to me. But in all seriousness, though, he and I have been working very closely together, and with the different experiences we both bring, our conversations have been very productive, and I'm convinced we're making some exciting innovations. So, Atul, it's all yours at this point.
Great. Can everyone hear me? I mean, Paige, am I on?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. No problem. I don't know whether you can see my screen. David, can you see my screen?
You can, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. And I am now going to go into, here we go. So good morning, and thank you very much to everyone for being on this webinar. It's a pleasure and an honor to be involved in this sort of an effort. And David, thank you very much for the kind words. I think, you know, you and I have been working very closely, and David is in a very interesting way. Normally when I work with companies, I mean, I always say I'm the ivory tower guy, and the managers out there are the practitioners. And for the first time, I've been called a practitioner, and David is the research guy, because David has done a lot of research on this issue. And he and I have had long conversations on what might be worthwhile in an online approach to case teaching. I'm going to try and address two things in our webinar here in the time that I have been given. One is I want to talk about the philosophy behind the case method in general. And I think a lot of you, I mean, I think nearly 60 to 70% of you have actually done the case method. And I'll talk a bit about that and what the case method means and what it originally meant and what it is now being used for. And then I'll jump into what online case teaching is all about and give you an example of what we are doing here, David and I are doing together. I mean, I do the cases, but you know, David has really helped me to design the whole thing. So the case method actually has its origins back at Harvard Business School. I mean, and even now, the traditional case method at Harvard Business School is very different from the way a lot of people have used it. I find that there are three sort of approaches to doing the case method: inductive versus deductive, experience versus lecture, and learning by doing versus by learning by observation. And they all these are three opposite ends of the spectrum. And when I first began my career as a professor, I did not know much about the case method. And you know, when you become a professor, you're very good at a very microscopic aspect of your research, and teaching is something which you learn along the way. I attended the Harvard Business School case method workshops and so on, and I realized what works at Harvard Business School doesn't necessarily work at the rest of the world. So I tried the Socratic method to case discussion, and pretty much realized that it was not going to work. The students hated it, and they didn't like it. And part of it was what I call as a 60-40 sort of, or 80-20 problem in any case discussion. And that does get accentuated even further when we talk about online case discussions. Let me tell you what a 60-40 or 80-20 problem is. On an average day, an MBA student typically, or a participant, will read the case, but if you have an audience of 100, around 20% of the class reads the case totally, thoroughly, 40% browses it, and 20% doesn't even read it. And then what happens is, in a traditional case discussion, if you begin the discussion, the people who set up the facts are the ones who read the case. Halfway through the discussion, the people who have not read the case start adding comments. And towards the end of the discussion, the people who have not read the case say, hey, I know enough now that I can chime in and throw in some random comments. And that creates a very bad experience for the participants and for the professor, unless you have real superb control over the classroom environment. And that classroom environment, in face-to-face you can do that, in online it can be problematic. And so therefore we need to have different approaches, and the online approach will allow a lot of levers by which you can control this problem, what I call the free riding problem. And so therefore I think that's one issue, and I say learning by doing versus learning by observation. Learning by doing is much better because you force people into getting prepared. The second issue is inductive versus deductive. And I think case methods is primarily an inductive approach where you try and evolve a framework through a discussion as opposed to giving them the framework ahead of time. And very few courses and very few classes across the world do that. In fact, I think David and I are perhaps now trying to put together something which is fairly unique with the gated method which we have at MBA at UNC. And so I think it's fairly unique. I mean, it allows us to do inductive, truly inductive, as opposed to deductive approach. And finally, I think case methods are best taught through experience as opposed to the professor lecturing. And those are the three philosophies. I mean, the extreme left-hand side, inductive, experiential, and learning by doing is what I really espouse in any case method, and especially in the online world. I think the biggest issue when we get to online case discussions is the challenge of engagement. And I think this is something which MBA at UNC has done amazingly well, and we're trying to, I think we do believe we are at the cutting edge on this issue. David's PhD thesis was exactly on these issues, is how do you get participants involved in an online discussion, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous. We believe synchronous is easier in terms of engagement. Asynchronous is a bit more difficult, but we have tools for both. Moving to the real issue is the pros and cons of online discussion. I think going back to this issue of engagement, online discussions, webinars, and I have you folks now on a webinar. How do I know that you're truly engaged with me? And an example which David gave, he said in one of our classes what we do is cold calling. And cold calling does allow that. You do realize that people are listening to you. But that doesn't mean that they are understanding what you're doing. And you need to have more tools and ways of figuring out whether they are understanding what you're getting at. And so that's one of the challenges of online discussion. The pros of online discussion are really truly that you do not have to run a 3-hour discussion. You can get done, I mean, there's parsimony of thought process. You can be precise, you can be concise, you can get things done, you can, the cacophony of a classroom, a physical classroom vanishes. There's a protocol, people raise their hands online and you say, okay, well, X person said this. How does the Y person react to it? It does require the ability to manage that discussion, but the advantages are huge because you do not have the cacophony of a market out there. You can run a smoother discussion. The con, of course, is that you do not know whether people are actually engaged, and you need to have tools. And I'll give you an example of class, and we'll go into that as to what we're doing there in a minute. The class which I'm going to give an example on is a corporate strategy class and corporate business strategy. I mean, I just use the word loosely, strategy here. Let me move to my next slide and I'll show you what might be the approach, or what is rather the approach that we have for case discussions. So what we have is a gated approach, and it's truly an inductive approach. So I would expect the students to have read the case ahead of time. And to ensure that they've read the case ahead of time, what I do is I make them complete an online assignment before the actual discussion of the case. So before we get online, they have gone asynchronous. They've read the case completely. There will be 2 or 3 questions assigned, and generally those questions have sort of a 1 sentence or a yes or no response. And I force the students to take a position on it, because one of the things we really want is people to take a position, because otherwise it becomes tough to run the discussion. After the students have done the case, read the case and done the assignment, let's say we have 15 students, which is our typical section size at MBA at UNC. I would have read the responses ahead of time, and I would have integrated that into my presentation. The students have not seen how I've used that response, but I know how I'm going to use the response, and I'll show an example in a little while what I would do. The students don't know that I have read the responses. I mean, they're aware that I can see the responses. I've read the responses. I put them into my slide deck, and we begin the discussion, and I use the responses to evolve the underlying theory. So I go around the room asking if person A, hey, you said this, person B, why did you say that? And they can see the responses just as you can see my slide deck on in the what you can see just now on the screen. They would be able to see it. And as we go through the whole discussion, I would evolve the framework up on the board or on the slide deck. So instead of using the chalkboard, what I'm doing is I'm using the responses and showing them how a discussion can evolve online, and we come to the framework at the end of the discussion. Discussion ends, the students can go back and offline, not in a synchronous fashion, but in an asynchronous online session, go back and see a summary of the discussion, read an assigned article which will tell them what the framework was and how we evolved it. And then I will get them to apply that framework in a homework assignment. And once they have applied that framework, they get a chance to go back and look at a solution on that homework. So what we have done in this part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 is that first, we've got them to get prepared ahead of time. Second, we engage them in a classroom discussion because they know that their responses are being used, and we are making actual use of that in the classroom discussion. They're being held accountable for that response. Using that response, we evolve a framework and apply it to the case. And then they go back and practice that framework on a case which is similar but not the same. And so those are the 4 parts. And so we have actually created a gated system which goes through this part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. Let me show you an example of how one would do this actually. The flow itself, how would it work? And since I'm a strategy professor, I'm going to give you an example of a very popular case. It's a Harvard Business School case called the Cola Wars case, where Coke versus Pepsi. And the conceptual framework that I would like the students to get at is, let's say, the Porter's 5 forces framework, which most of you would be aware of, which talks about how these 5 forces can help, managing the 5 forces can help companies in particular industries get ahead and make a lot of money. Now, what I would do is ahead of time, the online assignment would be only with the case. They would not get the Porter 5 forces framework. In fact, they wouldn't be even aware ahead of time that we are going to evolve the 5 forces framework. In every session, what we will have is only a case ahead of time. When the student logs into his LMS, what he or she sees is the case. And the case, they are supposed to read the case and bring their biases, their experience, their background. There's no right or wrong answer. I expect them to answer a question as simple as, why has Coke been successful? And provide a rationale for it. And so I might have 2 or 3 questions along that. Why Coke has been successful, provide me one reason, only one factor. I don't want a laundry list of factors. The most important factor. And what we have is a bunch of 15 students, and there might be 15 different reasons coming up. And having read the reasons ahead of time, what I do then is I put them into different buckets. Now, the analog in a live environment would be that I would go around the class asking people, what do you think is happening to Coke? And then I would evolve, and I put their responses on the chalkboard and then use that chalkboard to evolve the framework. What I've done here is I have it ahead of time. I'll put down, I'll say, David Foster, you said that Coke is successful for the reason that it manages its suppliers very well. Why do you think so? And then David is on the spot, and he will have to explain. But then I'll put up David against, let's say, Paige. Hey, Paige, you said that the reason why they're so successful is because they got great advertising. And then I can run a discussion and say, hey, how do you react, Paige, to David's comment and vice versa? And then I can bring in someone else and say, if anyone else wants to raise a comment, and they raise their hand and we bring them in. And as the discussion moves along, I would bring up all the 5 on the board. Each of these 5 forces will evolve on the PowerPoint. And as we close the case out, I will put the PowerPoint for the 5 forces framework and say, look, what we have evolved through your discussion and through your comments is a very well-established model in industry analysis called the Porter's 5 forces framework. And all of you are perhaps right here that each of these forces matters, but collectively these forces put together matter. And that's why Coke has done very well. Now, this is a very simple example. I mean, of course, each case would be different. Situations would be different. In some cases, the conceptual framework may not be as simple and powerful as what I've given you with Porter's 5 forces. But we have different approaches. I gave you one example of how one would create engagement. Because what we have done is we have created a gated system where the students are required upfront to prepare. They are being held accountable in an online environment. And not only are they being held accountable, but they're being forced to step up and comment and engage with each other through this discussion. So I think with that said, I think I would turn it back to Paige. I mean, this is just a simple example. David, I think we will respond to questions, but Paige, back to you. And I would love to take Q&A from our participants.
Hello, welcome back, or actually welcome back to myself. Thank you so much for this. That was a very interesting discussion of how you approach trying to translate the classroom experience into the online experience, especially with regard to kind of the checks and balances, I guess you would say, of how, making sure that people are involved. I actually had a couple of things that I was kind of curious about, and I was hoping that you might be able to respond to. One is there has been tons of discussion in the education community in general and business education about these MOOCs. They're being hailed as kind of the next big thing in education. People are talking about how they'll be able to spread quality business education and education in general to the developing world and increase access to leading professors such as yourselves and on things like Coursera and other online platforms such as that. However, I wonder, one of the things that we talk about a lot and that I know y'all obviously feel strongly about is that case method is a very significant part of helping teach people to be good decision makers, and that's what management education is quite a bit about. And so how would you react to that in this context? You talked about how you limit classes to 15, you need to be able to see everyone's faces. So can you talk about how you might translate that that online approach to something that was much broader? Is it possible, or is there a problem there?
Yeah, this is David. I'll attempt to take that one. I'd never heard the word pronounced, by the way. You pronounce it MOOCs?
It's my guess. I've always read it too.
I've always thought MOOCs and whenever I've read it, but I could be wrong. Well, I think it's quite a stretch, honestly, to do anything resembling the case method in the context of a MOOC or whatever the correct pronunciation is. Those systems are designed to be largely self-paced. Now, I happen to have an analog in my own experience where, I created interactive cases that were intended to be self-paced, but and so, I guess you could imagine doing something like that and putting it on a MOOC. But and I applaud the effort of the schools that are supporting this and experimenting. And I think it's really cool. I mean, the standard questions that everyone has about it, though, are about whether the students can get real credit for it, and it does, you know, with that many students working on the same assignments, you know, academic integrity is a huge issue, cheating. I would think that with MOOCs, the focus is more likely to be on kind of introductory topics and more, you know, for lack of a better word, mechanical topics, which is sort of the polar opposite of what you're trying to, the method and principles that you're trying to teach through the case method.
Great. Atul, did you have any?
I think, I mean, again, I think moving on to a mass, I think the case method was and is really meant for not mass education. I mean, part of it is that it's inductive, and you know, I think there's a popular term, one of my colleagues, in fact, it's very popular now, is crowdsourcing. Now, you can do sort of crowdsourcing and so on when you're looking at product design, and but I think when you start getting at something where you expect to evolve a framework or a concept, I'm not sure. I mean, it would be, I think I would echo what David said, is that for some introductory concepts and so on, I think that'd be fair. Or I would say, you know, if you're looking at the edges, I mean, I think, okay, you want to do something, you know, out of the world, and you want to do crowdsourcing, you do mass, that's a different story. But I think for the sort of things that we are trying to achieve in our MBA programs and our executive programs, I'm not sure that would work out very well.
No, that's very fair, especially considering the experience that you've had. We have a question from, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, Shalini Matu from Kineo in the U.S., and she's asking, how do you design assessments for grades?
That's a good one, and I think, let me take that one. There are 2-3 things which we try and do here. One, so for example, what I like to do, I mean, and this is true whether it's online or, I mean, business education in general, we assess effort and quality both. You need to complete your work, and how well do you complete that work? That's both are involved there. And so first is for the online assignments. If they complete them, they get a certain number of points. And we do not evaluate that for content itself. I mean, as long as you have an opinion, then I would say, okay, fine. You did it, you got a certain number of points. Now, that does help a lot, because at the end of the day, I mean, there are a whole bunch of people who forget to complete the assignments, and that helps me tremendously, because I tell them, you helped me to create my code automatically. You didn't do your assignment, so you got hit. So that's one level. The other thing which we do is, this is where I do actually, and I think like the polling technique which you used just now, Paige, David and I would do a sort of like a survey. You know, we have a, how well do you assess your classmates' participation? So we triangulate it. I have a teaching assistant, I have the participants or the students vote, and I force them. I say, if you had one vote to give across the 15 people, who do you think gave you, really helped the class discussion? And they cannot see who they voted for, but I can see it. I mean, and I use that at the end of 10 sessions or 15 sessions or whatever hours, you know, the way our sessions run. And I use that to judge class participation. Independent of that, they also have homework assignments, which they do. And part of it is we do not have what are called exams in the strategy class, which are like blue book exams in a, you know, real world sort of virtual versus real world. We make them do these, and they are bound by the same honor code and so on. They do them individually, they turn them in, and they get an immediate response back and say like, well, this is what we would like you to have done. And so we evaluate that. So it's like 25% online assignments, 25% class participation, and 50% what are called graded application exercises. So that's how we do the assessments, and it's worked out pretty well. I mean, the class participation, in fact, on the online, I think has been really smooth, because people get a chance to see the comments, read the comments, and they think about it a lot before they vote for their participants. And crowdsourcing is pretty good in this regard. I mean, I've been very impressed by that.
Great. So our next question comes from Christine McIntosh. She's from Agate Publishing here in the U.S. and was wondering what kind of training you provide instructors before teaching cases, and what kind of support materials are available to them.
Yeah, I can take that one. That's something I'm pretty heavily involved in our online program. Quite a bit of training is required. First of all, and there's a few different areas of training that are needed. One that I would highlight, certainly though, is managing the synchronous session. These new section faculty that we bring on have a lot of challenges. They not only have to learn our platform, but they also have to, quickly get familiar with the course that we've, the sort of base course that we've developed and make it their own. So there's a lot of challenges. It's really the very first time that you teach online. It is a real juggling act, and it's tough. But we devote a lot of resources to having one-on-one training with faculty on the platform itself, and allow them to sort of get used to it and get used to moving around all the different resources that our online room has, and all the mechanics that go along about starting the audio and the webcams and all that sort of thing. They also meet with as early as possible. They jump into the course team meetings. This is the coordinating professor and the other faculty who are teaching that course together, and just to get acclimated and to ask questions and benefit from the experience of the other people who have been teaching the course. In terms of the course that Atul and I are working on, I mean, that's something that we'll want to face. Atul is a master teacher, and but we need to, as we grow, we're going to need to have other people teaching Atul's course, and they have to, have the same kind of success in the synchronous session that I have zero doubt Atul will have.
Great. Let's see. So our next is, and I apologize again for butchering this name, Mardik Chogolakian from INSEAD, wondering what our speakers think about the value of case studies for corporate trainings and which sectors will be interested most.
I'll take that one. I think
Sure.
cases, I think actually I do a lot of executive education, and I've been involved. UNC has our custom programs are one of the highest ranked in the world. We've done a lot of work, and I think cases are very important, very much, because it's all about decision making, about putting people into the shoes of the decision maker and so on. I'm sure at INSEAD also you use, INSEAD has got part of the European Case Clearinghouse and does an amazing job with cases also. I think the challenge, of course, is that you want to do corporate training online. I think you run into the same dilemmas. In fact, the dilemmas are even more. Part of it is because the engagement, we live in a world which is, we are always multitasking, and what you want is engagement. And so creating that engagement, I think one needs to have different approaches. So I would still use these sort of online tools where they would be forced to do things. I did, the equivalent of a webinar, sort of corporate teaching for one of the global companies. And I think David mentioned that, we do cold calling, and I do cold calling, and I tell the CEOs of these companies that if you're going to be online, I will cold call you, I'll cold call anyone, and I want people to be engaged and run the discussion the same fashion that we would run, and I think we have had amazing success with that. So cases, definitely we can use, it's the same story. They're very valuable for MBA programs, they're very valuable for corporate training.
I would just tack on a little bit, one of the reasons I think the case method is so effective, I would kind of go back into theory land and talk about constructivism, which is a term that has a bit of baggage with it, but the fact that instead of telling them how to think about something, you're confronting the learner with an unfamiliar situation and forcing them to reason with their own knowledge about it first before you start, lecturing to them about how they're supposed to think about it. And I think if you do it that way, it's sort of standing traditional education on its head. But it's very effective, and whether you're in the academic setting or the corporate setting.
Great. So we do have a follow-up question from Shalini. Wondering, does it always work to teach the concept after the students have read the case, or have you designed sometimes where concepts are taught first and then the students are put in breakouts to use the concepts and solve the case? And which one do you recommend?
I think I'll give you an opinion and I'll let David, because David works with a larger number of faculty members also. I mean, I think David has seen a larger variety. I have done both in the past, and I think it depends. I mean, the concept is very complex and it requires a lot of, there's some mathematical work involved and so on, then I may choose to give part of the concept ahead of time. And say break it up into two pieces, and here's a piece which I will talk about ahead of time, but there's a piece, or they might have done that, read the piece ahead of time, and then there's a piece which will evolve in class. And so we can split it up, but David, I think you have seen both models work.
Yeah, I guess I'm of the same mind. It depends. For example, throwing a case at students about, let's say the bond market, for example, when they don't even know what the terminology is or something like that, that of course does not make sense, and you need to acquaint them with some ideas and concepts before they can even make sense of the case. But I guess my bias, though, is where possible, where it's not going to overwhelm them, I tend to prefer that give them the case first, and then talk about it, and then talk about the theory.
Right. All right. So we do have one other follow-up question from Christine McIntosh back to the training issue, and she's asking, do the lead faculty ever join a class session to observe sessions?
They do, yeah. The lead faculty. Well, there's a longer answer. The lead faculty is the one who is principally responsible for developing the course in the first place, and all the synchronous sessions are recorded, and so I know lead faculty from time to time will take a look at that. The second role in our team is called a coordinating professor, and and they work more closely with the section faculty and run the weekly meetings with them, and the coordinating faculty, in fact, is visible to all of the sections. Like they'll post announcements that go across sections, and so they're very involved. The lead faculty typically will, in many cases at least, will often join the first meeting of the quarter and actually go on the live session and talk a little bit and introduce themselves to the students in the live session. And so yeah, like I said, it's very much a team effort, and our lead and coordinating faculty are very involved in what's going on and know what's happening in all of the course sections that are running.
Great, thanks, David. We have about 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna make this our last question. We've had tons come in. This is from Carl Obermiller. It looks like he's from Seattle in the U.S. And he was wondering if you could share what you think about challenges of dealing with the classes of 30, and maybe some further last tips for maintaining and monitoring engagement.
I think let me take a crack at it, and then David, you can close this out, because I think you thought about this a lot more from a research angle also. I think as you go up with the class size, you can do it. I think the instructor involvement is much higher. And I say this is one of the things is that online education and online engagement, A lot of people believe that, well, faculty get a free, like, hey, it's much easier. I don't think it's easier or difficult. It just requires a different set of rules. And I think what we are at UNC evolving is trying to evolve a protocol on online business education. And the analog I would draw is that if you go back and look at, I mean, I do a lot of research in technology. I mean, when the first automobiles came about, how did people know that they had to be on the right side or the left side of the road and so on? Or what was that, who yielded and so on? What's the protocol? And I think what we are evolving at this point is a bunch of ideas and rules on online. So we are pioneers in that regard. And I think online engagement for a class size of 30 is also possible with the same thing. But the instructor needs to know who the 30 people are ahead of time. See, finally, it's a question of familiarity with your students. If you know your students well, your students are going to be prepared. And, if you know you're going to be engaging with strangers, then what happens is the level of participation doesn't go up. I mean, the first class which I teach in my daytime program or even in the online program is always, the engagement levels are lower. But as we move up and familiarity builds up and people say, wow, the professor is actually taking interest in me and understanding what I'm up to, I think you get to create that engagement. So even with a class of 30, I think you could do it. Now in our MBA at UNC, we can limit it to 15, and I think that's the reason. But you could do it with 30, but you would expect an involvement of the faculty member more. David.
Yeah, I guess I would throw out a note of caution. I'm not experienced with it, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But I have heard anecdotally that some of our faculty have said that the difference in the class meeting between when they have a full class of 15 and when they have like 10 or 12 is really remarkable. They've told us, and so I really do think the dynamic changes quite significantly as you add more and more and more people to it. So what can I say? I like our model. I feel like 15 is a pretty good cap. And the other thing about just a quick comment about monitoring participation. There's a lot of creativity among our faculty in how they do this. One I'll just mention in particular is at the end of each class, each live session, one of our faculty members in corporate finance puts up a poll with all the other students' names and asks them to vote. Who do you think contributed the most in today's discussion? And that's just one method of many different methods you could use, but I think it's kind of a creative one.
Great. Well, thank you. That is exactly 10 a.m. So here on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. So I want to thank you both very much for your time and for sharing your experience and expertise. This has been a fascinating discussion. I want to let all of our participants know that if you have any further questions, feel free to email us. You will be receiving an email with a recording of this as well as the slides that David and Atul presented today. And I do hope that we will see you at some of our other Case Method Month webinars later this month. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.